There is a dinosaur outside your window right now. It has feathers. It is singing. You call it a bird, and you have called it that your whole life, but it is the last living branch of a family that once shook the ground with its footsteps. To understand how it got here, you have to go back 66 million years to the worst 10 minutes in the history of life on Earth. It began as an ordinary morning. The air was warm and wet. Somewhere in what is now North Dakota, sturgeon drifted in a slow river, and along its banks, dinosaurs did what they had done for 160 million years. They ate, they rested, they paid no attention to the sky, but the real story of that day is far stranger than any monster movie you have ever seen, because for most of the creatures alive that morning, the thing that killed them was not the asteroid, not the fire, not the wave. It was something quieter and far more patient. And it started with a point of light. High above the planet, something was falling, a rock from space, somewhere between 10 and 15 kilometers wide, big enough that if you set it down on a city, it would blot out the whole skyline and keep going up past where planes fly. It was moving at around 20 kilometers every second, faster than a rifle bullet, faster than any thought a dinosaur could have. For a few minutes, it would have looked like nothing at all. A new star, a bright dot in the daytime sky, growing. No alarm, no warning. Nothing in 160 million years of instinct had prepared a single animal to look up and understand what that growing dot meant. Then it touched the atmosphere, and the dot became a second sun. It came down near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And here is the first piece of terrible luck, the first of several that had to line up perfectly for the world to end. It did not fall straight down. It came in at an angle somewhere between 45 and 60 degrees. In 2020, a team led by the scientist Gareth Collins ran the numbers on that angle and found it was just about the most destructive path the rock could have taken. A steeper or shallower hit would have thrown less debris into the sky. This one was aimed by pure chance to do the maximum possible harm. The rock struck the earth and vanished into it in less than a second. The energy it released is a number the human mind cannot really hold. Somewhere around 100 trillion tons of TNT, billions of times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. In an instant, a hole opened in the crust, nearly 180 kilometers across, and a plume of vaporized rock and ocean was hurled upward, punching a temporary hole clean through the atmosphere. Anything nearby was simply gone, but you were not asking about nearby. You were asking about the animals 1,000 miles away who felt the ground move a few minutes later and had no idea why. This is where the story stops being a guess. Because in that river in North Dakota, at a site now called Tanis, something was buried so quickly and so completely that it survived for 66 million years, waiting to be read. The paleontologist Robert De Palma has spent over a decade digging it out, and what he found is as close as science has ever come to a photograph of that day. The impact sent seismic waves racing out through the rock of the planet, the same kind of shaking as an earthquake, but far larger. Minutes later, those waves reached the ancient river. They did not create an ocean tsunami, they did something stranger. They made the water itself slosh violently, back and forth, like a bathtub kicked by a giant. Scientists call this a siege. To picture how far such a thing can travel, consider that the 2011 earthquake off Japan sloshed the water in Norwegian fjords 8,000 kilometers away. The sloshing river at Tanis surged up its own banks, then back, dragging fish and mud and debris into a churning grave. And then the sky began to fall. When the asteroid hit, it flung molten rock high above the atmosphere, where it cooled into tiny glass beads, barely a millimeter wide. Scientists call this ejecta, which simply means the material thrown out by the impact. These little beads, light as sand, rained back down across thousands of kilometers. At Tanis, that glass began arriving roughly 13 minutes after the impact, and it kept falling for an hour or more. And here is the detail that turns numbers into something you can feel. De Palma's team found those glass beads lodged in the gills of the fish, not scattered over their bodies, inside their gills, which means those fish were still breathing, still pulling water as the sky rained molten glass into the river around them. They inhaled the fallout of the apocalypse. Then they were buried alive, mid breath, and stayed that way until a human being brushed the dirt off them. Now, you should know that not everyone accepts every claim about Tanis. The Princeton geologist Gerta Keller has pointed out that glass beads can be washed into younger rock and fool you about the date. Some of the site's most dramatic claims have not yet passed full scientific review, but the fish, with the glass sealed inside their gills, are hard to argue with. They were there. They breathed it in. As the glass fell, the sky itself was turning against everything below it. All that ejecta, re entering the atmosphere, dumped its heat into the air. Across much of the planet, the sky may have glowed red hot for hours, like the inside of an oven, hot enough in places to scorch the land beneath it. The animals that had survived the shaking now looked up at a sky the color of embers. That was the 10 minutes. That was the blast, the wave, the falling glass, the burning sky. If the story ended there, it would already be the worst day in the history of the world. But it did not end there. And what came next is the part that actually did the killing. Remember the terrible luck of the angle? There was a second piece of luck, worse than the first. Of all the places on Earth the rock could have struck, it hit a shallow sea floored with rock rich in sulfur. The impact vaporized that sulfur and flung it into the high atmosphere, along with a vast pall of soot and dust from the burning and the debris. And there it stayed. For years, that veil hung in the sky and turned day into a permanent gray twilight. The sunlight that reaches the ground, the sunlight that every plant on Earth drinks to stay alive, was choked off. This is what scientists call an impact winter. The world went cold and dark, not for a day, but for season after season. Think about what that means slowly. When plants cannot get sunlight, they die. When the plants die, the animals that eat plants starve. When those animals starve, the hunters that eat them starve too. The whole vast machine of life, from the smallest leaf to the largest predator that ever walked, ran on sunlight, and someone had switched off the sun. The giant dinosaurs did not need to be burned or crushed. They simply ran out of food in the dark. A creature the size of a bus needs to eat almost constantly, and there was nothing left to eat. The largest animals, the ones that had ruled every landscape on the planet, were now the ones with the least chance of surviving. Their size, which had been their whole advantage, became a death sentence. Around three-quarters of all species on Earth vanished in the aftermath. Every dinosaur that could not fly, gone. How do you even know all this happened? That is perhaps the most remarkable part. In 1980, long before anyone had found the crater, a father and son named Luis and Walter Alvarez were studying a thin layer of clay that shows up in rocks all over the world, marking the exact moment the age of dinosaurs ends. Inside that clay, they found a strange amount of a metal called iridium. Iridium is rare on the surface of the Earth, but common in asteroids. That thin line in the rock was the fingerprint of the killer scattered across the entire planet. People laughed at their idea at first. Then someone found the crater buried under the Yucatan, exactly the right age and size, and the laughing stopped. There is one more thing that layer of clay can tell you. By studying the growth rings inside the Tanis fish, the researcher Melanie During and her colleagues worked out the season the world ended. It was spring. In the northern half of the planet, things were being born. Flowers were opening, and then the light in the sky appeared. So return now to the dinosaur outside your window, because something lived. In the cold and the dark, the giants had no chance, but the small and the hidden did. Creatures that could burrow underground, creatures that could eat seeds and dead things, and insects instead of fresh green leaves. Among them were little feathered dinosaurs, the ancestors of every bird alive today. And among them, too, were small, shivering, warm blooded animals that had spent the age of dinosaurs hiding in the dark and had gotten very good at surviving there. Those were your ancestors. You are here because they made it through the long night. Every mammal alive, every human who has ever lived, descends from something small enough to hide from the apocalypse. Think about how thin that thread is. If the rock had struck a few minutes earlier or later, it would have hit deep ocean instead of that shallow, sulfur rich sea, and the world might never have gone dark. If it had come in at a gentler angle, the giants might have staggered on. The dinosaurs ruled the earth for over 150 million years, and it took 10 minutes of astonishing bad luck and the years of darkness that followed to end their reign and hand the world to the survivors. So there is a dinosaur outside your window right now. It has feathers, and it is singing. It is the great grandchild of the ones who lived. And so, in the strangest possible way, are you.